Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mauricio Ibero. I'm the CEO of the Seattle International Foundation, and it's my great honor to kick us off this afternoon. First, I'd like to welcome all of you here. For those of us that dedicate our professional lives to development and reducing poverty in Central America, and we often feel alone because the region doesn't get that much attention. Sure feels nice to be in this room today with all of you to talk about the region and talk about how progress is possible. I'd like to just say a few words in terms of this project. It's been our privilege to support WOLA in this initiative. It's very important to have rigorous analysis and be able to really understand what development dollars do in the region, especially in the Northern Triangle. This project will do that. It's only the beginning of a process, but I think a very important first step. And I, on behalf of the foundation, invite you to participate and to stay involved and to hopefully adopt this amazing tool and help WOLA and the experts that WOLA works with to get the information, use it, and make it a very important advocacy tool for not only the advocates here in Washington working on these issues, but our partners in Central America who really are doing the important work every day trying to push for structural change. So with that, I'd just like to say again, thank you for being here. It's a great privilege to support this initiative. And I'm going to turn it over to the far end here of the podium to Claire Selke, our moderator today. Thanks again.
Hello, I'm so grateful to WOLA and to the Seattle International Foundation, to the Central America Caucus, and to Representative Norma Torres for the invitation to moderate today's panel with such a great group of experts who are going to talk about country conditions and how their new tool is going to help people like us in Congress, but also in the NGO community in both Central America and the United States, monitor what's going on in Central America and how U.S. investments are making a difference in that region. I think as Congress just approved the 2017 appropriations, and you will soon be receiving the 2018 budget request, this is a great time for this to be happening. So I just wanted to introduce our panel, and then if the Congresswoman arrives, we will let her say a few words. I also want to say thank you to the ambassador from El Salvador, who's here already, Claudia Canjora and De Centeno. And then if the other ambassadors arrive, we're also very grateful that they plan on attending today. Basically, each of our panelists is going to talk for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll take your questions for them. Adriana Beltran is from WOLA, and she's head of the Citizen Security Program. She is going to talk about the monitor and its goals and what it does and how you can use it. She's testified and written extensively on Central America, citizen security, police reform, and is a great expert. Jeff Thale is going to talk about El Salvador. I think he's going to be the first one to talk about the country conditions. He's been covering El Salvador since the 1980s. He's WOLA's program director, so he is basically following the entire hemisphere now and is called upon by the media and by Congress to testify frequently on all the countries in Central America. Then Helen Mack is the founder and president of the Myrna Mack Foundation in Guatemala. It's an organization that produces research and proposals aimed at combating impunity and promoting the rule of law. She also started the Guatemala Forum, which is a network of more than 50 organizations that support the work of CICIG, the UN Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. And when I met her in 2011, she was head of a presidential commission on police reform. She's an expert on policing issues in Guatemala. And finally, I've never met her until today, but Madonia Ayestas is the director of the National Observatory of Violence at the National Autonomous University of Honduras. The Institute is basically a leading institution that monitors violence trends and provides data and analysis to government institutions, NGOs, and the public in Honduras. She has a lot of experience in violence prevention in the school and family context, as well as in mediation and conflict resolution. I'm looking forward to hearing all of you today, beginning with Adriana.
Thank you, Claire. First, I want to begin by thanking the Central America Caucus, Representative Torres, Mauricio Esayas, for co-hosting this event with us. I'm very glad to be here with my colleagues from Guatemala and Honduras, and just to convey the regrets of our partner, Yulop, from El Salvador, who unfortunately at the last minute was not able to come, and to thank Jeff for filling in and sharing some of the initial findings of the project. First, I'm really delighted to be here and share with you what is a culmination of months of work between WOLA and our partners, and to launch what Mauricio said is the start of a process, of a tool that we hope will be of use to policymakers and to all of us who follow very closely the situation in Central America. WOLA and our partners have welcomed the renewed attention to Central America, the support and the interest of the U.S. Congress to figure out a way of addressing the many challenges that the region faces, the violence, the weak institutions, the lack of economic opportunities, and the poverty that are driving many people to flee their communities and their homes. And in the discussions that we've had, a lot has centered on trying to figure out how can we as civil society help ensure that U.S. assistance is being targeted properly. How can we help ensure that this assistance is having the results that we all hope to see in the region? And just as equally important, how are we able to assess or help assess the level of commitment on the part of the Central American governments, which is so vital to this process, to see lasting reforms happen in their own countries? We often, in our discussions, talk a lot about reform, institutional reform. But what do we really mean when we say police reform, the need to strengthen the justice sector? And how can we best measure whether we are actually moving in that direction? And that is really the impetus behind this idea and this project of creating the Central America Monitor. So just briefly, concretely about the project, the monitor has two key components. The first one is really to try to track and monitor U.S. assistance to the region, to provide as much information as we can find on 8 levels to the region, on where the money is going and for what kinds of programs. And the second big component is to seek to evaluate the progress in Central America and to assess whether there have been concrete advances, setbacks, or a lack of progress in a number of key areas. And to do that, over the last 10 months, WOLA and our partners have developed a series of indicators. Now, our goal here was not to come up with an exhaustive list of every possible indicator in every area. What we try to do through the course of the initial phase of the project was to identify those areas that we considered important, based also on those areas where we have an expertise or knowledge of. And from there, try to identify what criteria would be able to help us assess over time whether things are moving in the right direction. This is the back end of our project, of our database, but really just to walk you through the process that we went through over the last 10 months was trying to define what we wanted to measure, how we were defining the problem in these 10 key areas. What were the main components and subcomponents that we wanted to address? Try to define very clearly which are the institutions that we hope to evaluate and what concrete criteria or indicators can help us measure whether there has been change in these components, one that would be applicable to the extent possible in the 3 countries of the Northern Triangle, and finally to determine what sources of information we were going to use, trying to think of information that is reliable, that exists, but also information that we as civil society could have access to. And the end result is a series of about 150 indicators that cover 46 subcomponents, 25 components in 10 key areas. We have included quantitative and qualitative data, mainly to ensure that we gain as clear of a picture as possible on conditions on the ground. As many of you know, numbers alone don't always give you the full picture. So we want to make sure that we can portray as adequately as possible how things are shaping up in the region. And in terms of sources of information, we're going to use government information and statistics. We're using surveys. 2 of our partners organizations have a long history of work doing perception surveys. We're doing interviews with a number of sectors, reviewing existing legislation, and doing analysis of very specific cases that we've selected to see how investigative capacities are improving and how things are moving through the justice system. So just to walk you very briefly through the 150 indicators and areas that we're looking at. The first area is our efforts to strengthen the capacity and the independence of the justice system. And here we're really looking at the Attorney General's offices, the courts, the public defenders, trying to gauge number of officials, geographic coverage, issues of workload, but also looking at selection processes, disciplinary processes, budget allocations, and the protection mechanisms that are afforded to justice officials. In the area of transparency, we're going to be looking at the scope and quality of access to information laws. And actually, we are going to be using the country's public information laws to gather some of the data in order to assess the quality of the information. And looking at budgets and access to budget and allocations, particularly in the areas of security, justice, and defense. We're also going to be looking at the issue of combating corruption, and here looking at how laws adhere to international standards, the numbers and types of cases that are being investigated, prosecuted, and resolved, but also reviewing a selected number of cases, of emblematic cases, to see how these are being handled, and looking at the issue of the functioning of different oversight bodies. Related to this area, and this particularly pertains to the case of Guatemala and Honduras, is looking at the level of support, collaboration, and commitment of the part of the Guatemalan government and Honduran government to cooperate in the case of Guatemala with the International Commission Against Impunity, and in the case of Honduras with the MAXI that was established last year. Another important issue that we've identified is the strengthening of the civilian police forces. And here trying to determine, are there efforts being made to create a professional, accountable police force that is close to the community? So looking at issues of recruitment, of selection, of training, internal controls, allocation of resources, but also issues of trust of the community to the police and relations between the police and the community. An area that is related to that is looking at, are there measures being taken to limit the role of the military in law enforcement, which for many of you that follow the region closely, this has been an issue for many years. And here's really trying to determine, is there a clear plan? Is there a plan with activities, with timetables that we can verify? The seventh area is looking at issues to tackle violence and organized crime. So really to assess their efforts to bolster the investigative capacity of the justice and law enforcement institutions, again, number and types of cases that are investigated and prosecuted and resolved, looking at a series of emblematic cases that we've identified as well. Another key issue is the protection of human rights. Again, looking at are the efforts of the investigative bodies being bolstered to try to investigate threats and attacks. We've also identified here a number of emblematic cases. We'll be looking at the functioning of protection mechanisms, and also looking, particularly doing a qualitative analysis of smear campaigns, which have been a huge problem, particularly in the case of Guatemala and in the case of Honduras. And finally, the last two areas focus on looking at civil society participation. So are there mechanisms, are there functioning that establish efforts to dialogue with civil society, with local communities? And the last one pertains particularly to the Alliance for Prosperity in terms of how the autonomous oversight bodies that were supposed to be established as part of this process are functioning. And just to end, this week, as Andromisa mentioned, we're launching this project. We've already started gathering much of this data and hope to be able to present the final findings in the next several weeks. And again, our intent here is to be able to gather this data on a systematic basis and to be able to share with you the findings of that data. So I hope that you will use the monitor. Again, this is a process, so as we start gathering information, we'll be revising as needed the indicators, but we hope you can use it and share with us, how best we can make it a useful tool for all of you. Thank you.
I wanted to quickly thank the ambassador from Honduras, Ambassador Marlon Tabora Munoz, and the ambassador from Guatemala, Maritza Ruiz Sanchez de Villman, who just arrived. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about the baseline. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about the baseline study in relation to El Salvador. As Adriana mentioned, our colleagues from El Salvador from the University Institute of Public Opinion Research weren't able to join us today, so I'm reporting on some of the baseline data they've been gathering. As everyone knows, El Salvador faces a number of major challenges. Not the only challenge, but one of those challenges has to do with violence, particularly gang violence, that has driven internal displacement and driven forced migration. And much of the U.S. assistance package is designed to work with the Salvadoran government and civil society in El Salvador to strengthen institutions in ways that will make the justice system more effective, reduce the likelihood of criminal violence, and therefore the pressures for displacement and migration. So the baseline study, taking these 10 indicators, what I want to do is just comment on 4 or 5 of them. First of all, in the areas, the sort of interrelated set of areas of justice system reform, corruption, anti-impunity measures, and transparency, the study looked at where does El Salvador stand today in those issues. And I think one of the key institutions it focused on and will continue to focus on over the next couple of years is the role of the Attorney General's office. Salvador's got an Attorney General who's been in office for about a year and a half, widely viewed both internally and externally as committed to pursuing cases of corruption and trying to address systematic impunity in the country. He has brought indictments against a major drug trafficker who for many years evaded prosecution, probably through a combination of collusion with corrupt officials and security measures. He has brought criminal cases against 3 former presidents, and he's opened a human rights unit that, among other things, is beginning to investigate the 1980 El Paso massacre. So for us, there's clearly a strong baseline here in the commitment of the Attorney General's office to addressing impunity and addressing major unresolved human rights cases. There are a number of emblematic cases that will mark progress or lack of progress in the Attorney General's office and their ability to move these cases through the criminal justice system. And I think we will see over the next year whether the Attorney General's office is capable of moving from making indictments to actually carrying out effective prosecutions. And that would be both a major challenge for the office and for the international assistance that's working with the government of El Salvador in providing technical assistance and training on areas like financial crime, coordination of complex cases, counter-narcotics, and other kind of more complex investigative areas. El Salvador, like many countries in the regions, has depended heavily on witness testimony for criminal cases, and moving from that to the use of scientific and technical evidence and the capacity to do so will be a major step forward and something we'll be looking at. So that's one kind of initial broad area where actually, starting from our baseline, we have encouraging steps, we have encouraging signs, and we have to see what kind of progress there is in the year to come. If you look at related areas of corruption and transparency, El Salvador actually has an access to information law. Non-governmental organizations are using that law. The Transparency International chapter in El Salvador uses that law. And though there's a continuing set there, as in many other countries and here for that matter, of issues about access to information, the law is in place and we'll be looking over the next year at its implementation. Similarly, El Salvador, interestingly, has over the last 2 years implemented a system that's been on the books but not previously used, in which deputies in the National Assembly have to report their income and assets when they enter office and then when they leave. And that's a really important step in terms of what it means for transparency on the part of deputies in the National Assembly and the assembly process. So we'll be looking at progress on those. Another major area among the indicators, the status of police and police reform issues. El Salvador has made a series of structural reforms in its police force, and structurally it's probably one of the stronger forces in the region. It's got a decent academy, it's got a recruitment and vetting process that's fairly effective. It has very limited investigative capacity, and its individual investigators have very high caseloads. And one of the very concrete measures to look at over the next year is, and over the next several years, is the restructuring of that office and how caseload levels are addressed so that investigators are able to be effective and recommend cases for criminal prosecution. El Salvador has had ups and downs over the years in its internal control system for the police. I think our partners and we view that the system is currently weak. And El Salvador's mounted a very aggressive anti-gang policing strategy. That strategy has, sadly, I think, from our point of view, been accompanied by charges of extrajudicial executions. And I think, from our point of view, the internal control system is not yet strong enough to adequately address those. That's a big issue to look at over the coming years. So, a set of issues in the police, a set of issues in the justice system, some relatively positive initial steps and some challenges. Just very quickly, two other things I'd comment on are that El Salvador's Supreme Court has, and particularly its constitutional chamber, has over the last several years played a very controversial role. People in the government dislike many of its decisions, people in the opposition dislike many of its decisions. I think our view is that on balance, though there are things to criticize, it's played an important role in establishing judicial independence and separation of powers. Next year, the entire 15-member Supreme Court has to be re-elected, or has to be nominated and elected, and it will be important over the next year to monitor the selection process, the role of the College of Attorneys and others in choosing who represents El Salvador on the Supreme Court and what that will mean for judicial independence. And then just finally, although there are a number of other areas to touch on that will be in the baseline study, on the human rights issues, I think we will continue to monitor, as I mentioned before with the Attorney General, the El Mozote case, which is really an emblematic case in terms of historic human rights issues, and then the role that both the Attorney General's office and the Procuraduría de Derechos Humanos play in looking at questions of extrajudicial executions. So I'll end there. I expect that there will be a baseline report in the next several months, and then subsequent reports updating on these and other issues.
Buenas tardes. Sin duda estos indicadores van a ser importantes para cada uno de los países, precisamente porque dará seguimiento objetivo, un instrumento objetivo, y como Observatorio Nacional de la Violencia de Honduras hemos hecho un seguimiento de la violencia y la criminalidad en el país con información de las fuentes oficiales del Estado de Honduras, con acceso a la información. Este esfuerzo sin duda ha sido iniciado por el gobierno del país y se está comprometido para que se pueda mejorar la situación. En este sentido, uno de ellos es el combate a la corrupción. Se ha evidenciado en estos últimos tiempos redes de poder, se ha evidenciado bandas criminales, grupos que se han dedicado a la corrupción desde el Estado, desde grupos económicos. Eso ha sido importante y el Estado ha creado organismos que han permitido que se vaya poco a poco, es falta fortalecerlo sin duda, como la Dirección de Policía de Investigación Criminal, la Agencia Técnica de Investigación desde el Ministerio Público como un cuerpo de investigación para que se puedan desarrollar todos estos esfuerzos. Además, se ha evidenciado también que ha creado las fiscalías anticorrupción, que también, los juzgados anticorrupción, que también han desarrollado y están para desarrollar y investigar casos. Es un esfuerzo que, de acuerdo a la demanda de la ciudadanía, con el grupo de los indignados en el país, con todo este trabajo que hizo la sociedad civil para crear la MAXI y la apuesta, esfuerzo que permita evidenciar toda la corrupción y la impunidad que se da en el país. Y ahí se ha avanzado en varias acciones, ya decía yo, de los juzgados anticorrupción, la ley de política limpia, que es la que se está discutiendo con sus positivos y negativos en muchos aspectos, pero se está ya un instrumento legal para poder estudiar qué son los fondos que se están usando en campañas políticas y fijarle un límite a las campañas políticas de cada uno de los partidos políticos. Ha sido un esfuerzo también del gobierno de la MAXI que ha emprendido todo este esfuerzo. En materia de corrupción, también la depuración de la policía ha sido un esfuerzo. La Comisión de Depuración de la Policía Nacional ha evaluado en promedio 9.200 policías. De esa evaluación, el 32.5% han salido fuera de la institución policial, y eso es importante precisamente porque este es el tercer esfuerzo en Honduras para tener una policía más cercana a la ciudadanía. Esa evaluación va desde los generales hasta los policías que están en la calle, y eso ha sido importante porque no han visto solo a los de baja escala, sino también llegar hasta los generales. Falta mucho en materia de depuración de la Policía Nacional, precisamente porque hay que fortalecerla, no ir cerrando la Policía Nacional, y eso lo dijimos como sociedad civil, sino más bien poder desarrollar todo ese proceso de que se evalúe de acuerdo a estas pruebas de confianza que se requieren, pero también que se le dé seguimiento y monitoreo a que no vuelvan a estar involucrados en actividades delictivas, y eso también es algo que necesitamos fortalecer. Pero también es necesario que esta Policía Nacional, desde, como decía en el monitor Adriana, desde el reclutamiento hasta la formación, sea importante poder fortalecerla. En materia de violencia y criminalidad, como Observatorio de la Violencia, que hemos desarrollado un esfuerzo desde los últimos 13 años en el país, se ha evidenciado que hay una reducción de la violencia desde el 2011, que estábamos en uno de los países más violentos sin estar en guerra, con una tasa de homicidios como indicador importante, la tasa de homicidios de 86.5 por cada 100.000 habitantes, y al 2016 cerrar en una tasa de homicidios de 59.1 por cada 100.000 habitantes. Es importante, aun cuando hay otros tipos de violencia que es necesario trabajar, como la violencia doméstica, la violencia intrafamiliar, precisamente para desarrollar todas esas acciones que tienen que ver con la prevención. Es importante ver que la percepción de inseguridad también ha disminuido. Esto, cuando como Observatorio de la Violencia desarrollamos una encuesta de percepción de inseguridad y victimización, establece que todavía la gente tiene miedo, pero ya va disminuyendo al paso de que se va fortaleciendo las instituciones del Estado, hay mayor acceso a la justicia, pero también hay menor índice de violencia y criminalidad. La violación de los derechos humanos también es una tarea pendiente. Hay casos específicos que es necesario avanzar en Honduras, y ustedes ya saben algunos de ellos, el caso de Berta Cáceres, que todavía está en proceso de judicialización. Falta todavía evidenciar quiénes son los autores intelectuales de estos casos, pero también se ha evidenciado otros casos como azares antidrogas que han estado trabajando en el Estado y han sido víctimas de la violencia, y están en ese proceso de evidencia de quiénes fueron los autores, y muchos de ellos, como puedo explicarles, han estado involucrados policías y militares en esos casos, que ya se están diciendo quiénes son con nombre y apellido. Yo creo que es importante, dentro de todos los avances, podría continuar, solo tengo 7 minutos, pero es importante que en este monitor la objetividad va a ser importante. Va a haber un momento determinado para decir esto está bien, esto lo hemos hecho así, y la metodología también, precisamente porque la experiencia que tenemos en Honduras estructura de poder dar seguimiento a indicadores, 22 indicadores de seguridad ciudadana. Eso nos permite poder tener esa objetividad que caracteriza en muchos de los casos para evidenciar una situación cuando muchas veces no se quiera. Muchas gracias.
I just wanted to introduce Congresswoman Norma Torres. We wanted to thank you for hosting today's event and let you make some comments as we are going through the monitor. Thank you so much.
My turn? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I begin my comments, I'm not sure if they've already been acknowledged, but if not, I would like to acknowledge the 3 ambassadors that have joined us today, and they are Ambassador Claudia Canjura, the Centero Ambassador of El Salvador to the United States, and Ambassador Marlon Tabora Munoz, Ambassador of Honduras to the U.S., and Maritza Ruiz. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. I want to welcome everyone to this event and to say that this is a great and unique opportunity for all of us to hear from our panelists. In 2014, as many of you know, tens of thousands of children arrived on our southwest border. We know why they came. They were fleeing violence, they were fleeing poverty, and they were seeking assistance from the U.S. In the United States Congress, we made a commitment to help address these problems so that the children don't have to flee their homes. As someone who was born in Guatemala and came here when I was 5, I want to help create the conditions where the next Norma Torres can dream of being a member of Congress in their own home country. So with that, I want to say, I also want to thank my friend David Valadao, a Republican from California. I founded the Central American Caucus with him and a group of 37 members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, who have come together to take on this issue. I've also been an advocate for increased assistance to fight corruption, improve security, and promote economic development in Central America. In fiscal year 2016, Congress assigned $750 million for assistance in Central America, specifically the Northern Triangle. And then in fiscal year 2017, Congress has assigned an additional $650 million. These funds are a significant increase to previous years. And as members of Congress, we have to make sure that this taxpayer money is spent effectively. We have some very comprehensive conditions on the assistance. This is important, and it has helped to ensure bipartisan support for the funding. But we need to pay close attention to make sure that there is transparency. We also need to make sure that we are measuring these results effectively. This is why I am so pleased that WOLA and its partners have launched the Central America Monitor Project to help track the assistance and measure progress. I am confident that this is going to be a very valuable resource for members of Congress and for all of our staff. So I look forward to this briefing, and I thank you for coming today. I'm so happy that we have people outside waiting to come in. I'm very excited about the work that we are doing in the Northern Triangle, and I'm really grateful that you are all participating in this. Thank you.
Okay, so we have heard about El Salvador and Honduras, and now we're going to hear from Helen Mack about the conditions in Guatemala.
Muchas gracias. Creo que la congresista Norma Torres nos dio toda la introducción que necesitábamos hacer, pero efectivamente Guatemala comenzó a despertar, desde hace 2013 diría yo, pero el 2014 con la elección de magistrados a Corte Suprema de Justicia y Corte de Apelaciones fue un preludio para lo que se venía. Aquí estoy viendo yo a la magistrada Claudia Escobar, que tuvo precisamente el valor de poder denunciar la corrupción que se manejaba y la preocupación que teníamos los ciudadanos ante el tema de cómo se estaban eligiendo los magistrados y jueces, que eran para garantizar la impunidad en los actos de corrupción, tanto en ese momento, pues, tanto del país, del partido político saliente como el partido político entrante. Y esto es una de las razones por las cuales pues, también vamos a tener uno de estos indicadores. Y luego en el 2015 sí dio resultados con el nuevo comisionado, un caso que develó realmente la cooptación del Estado, en que no existe ninguna institución en donde no haya una corrupción. Y erradicar la corrupción de tantos años realmente pues, es una tarea difícil, y en palabras del comisionado todavía no hemos llegado al punto del no retorno. Nosotros vemos como un gran aliado realmente el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, en cuanto que justo el Congreso de Guatemala no escucha, los partidos políticos no son los receptores y canalizadores de las necesidades que la población tiene, y teniendo esta oportunidad del Congreso dando un apoyo tan significativo en un fondo económico, nos permite a nosotros que el gasto o la donación o los fondos que van a llegar a Guatemala no sean gastados solamente como un checklist de que se gasta o no se gasta. Nosotros lo que queremos verificar es que haya una calidad del gasto. Yo decía que de calidad del gasto de las donaciones que vienen, ¿verdad? Y por supuesto también de los presupuestos en el caso de Guatemala. Y digo esto porque yo sí quiero reconocer a las generaciones jóvenes. Tenemos una generación joven que salió vibrante en la plaza del 2015, que tiene una esperanza y que apenas estamos comenzando nuevamente a caminar sobre una tormenta, que nosotros ya nuestra generación llevan como 3 tormentas y no hay forma que podamos llegar al ojo del huracán. Pero esta juventud se merece que ellos vayan definiendo sus propios destinos, porque definitivamente ya con el Twitter y Facebook pensamos distinto, ¿verdad? Pero eso es para decir que hay una generación que está esperando este acompañamiento, que a veces es un acompañamiento político, porque estas redes económicas, políticas ilícitas que se han definido son tan poderosas que no podemos, sino hay otro poder político tan fuerte como ese. Y de esa es la razón por la cual sí consideramos beneficioso este monitoreo. Y también ustedes comprenderán también por qué entonces también estos grupos que han gozado de estos privilegios hacen como objeto de ataque a Estados Unidos y concretamente a su embajador, por tratar de cumplir condiciones o los benchmarks que el mismo Congreso y Senado de Estados Unidos han puesto para la ayuda. Por ejemplo, hay avances. Guatemala ha tenido avances con la lucha de los cambios institucionales. Por ejemplo, en los temas de justicia se acaba de aprobar recientemente la ley de carrera judicial, que lo que queremos es su independencia judicial, precisamente para que casos como la magistrada Claudia Escobar aquí presente no vuelva a suceder. Pero no solamente es la magistrada Claudia Escobar, ha recibido amenazas el juez Gálvez, por ejemplo, que está teniendo los casos de cooptación del Estado. También nos ha tenido la misma fiscal general, Tel Maldana, que incluso hubo un plan para asesinarla, contratando sicarios y pandillas de Honduras y El Salvador para que ella fuera asesinada. Tenemos casos como por ejemplo también la jueza Yasmín Barrios, que por llevar casos de derechos humanos y haber dado sentencias condenatorias, igualmente ha sido amenazada y también difamada. Esto es lo que no puede ser, porque es todo lo contrario. Los jueces con integridad, con honestidad, son los que deben de liderar, pero que no se atreven a sacar la cabeza y a luchar por su independencia, porque estas redes económicas, políticas ilícitas pues van tras de ellos. Entonces ese es el otro desafío. Tenemos un avance, pero tenemos un desafío de cómo se aplica esa independencia judicial, cómo se aplican esas sanciones judiciales. Creemos que en la depuración del organismo judicial, por ejemplo, hacerlo a través de la parte jurídica también viene siendo muy lenta. Nosotros estamos tratando de ver que se cumpla el tema de la integridad. Ustedes saben que para un juez la corrupción no tiene ni derechas ni izquierdas, no es una cuestión de ideologías, es de aplicar la ley sin ver quién es quién. Eso no quiere decir que pero tiene que, tenemos el derecho de que el razonamiento de la sentencia sea lo suficientemente fundamentada para que nosotros podamos hacerlo. Pero, por ejemplo, hay avances como los casos de corrupción, pero el desafío es cómo evitar el litigio malicioso. Entonces es la interposición del uso y abuso del amparo. El amparo no existe aquí en Estados Unidos, pero es cómo utilizar los recursos bajo el argumento del debido proceso para ir retrasando procesos. Entonces, por ejemplo, casos como la cooptación del Estado o la línea, hay toda una estrategia jurídica para ir retrasando y ganar tiempo, porque este año, por ejemplo, se vence y hay que elegir a la nueva fiscal o nuevo fiscal, ¿verdad? Entonces sí quieren tener una incidencia para esa elección, ¿verdad?, del fiscal o fiscal. En estos momentos, ya en agosto, se tiene que elegir, por ejemplo, al Procurador de los Derechos Humanos, que también ha sido una pieza clave, no solamente por velar por los derechos humanos nuestros, sino que también de apoyo al Ministerio Público o a la CICIG para lo que ha servido de Secretaría Técnica para la propuesta de reformas constitucionales. Por ejemplo, en el tema de seguridad, en el tema de prevención, también hemos tenido avances. En Guatemala, desde el 2008, justo con la venida de Sisi, se aprobó la ley de métodos especiales del crimen organizado, que se implementó la unidad de métodos especiales de los tribunales de alto riesgo y empezó a haber una coordinación de policía y ministerio público. Se privilegió la prevención y el análisis criminal precisamente para prevenir, y las desarticulaciones de las pandillas han sido más de 100 y pico de pandillas y se han salvado más de 200 vidas precisamente por esta unidad de métodos especiales, precisamente haciendo este análisis criminal. Nosotros creemos que eso sí nos diferencia de El Salvador y Honduras, de que tenemos indicadores más bajos en cuanto a homicidios por este privilegio de la prevención. Pero esto no solamente, tenemos que lograr que esto sea sostenible, y para el indicador, por ejemplo, de que las Fuerzas Armadas dejen la seguridad ciudadana, es porque lo que nosotros necesitamos es un cambio también del paradigma policial. Ustedes saben, la doctrina militar es una, que es defensa del país, y la doctrina policial es la defensa del ciudadano. Entonces no podemos tener dos doctrinas distintas compitiendo, y esto, por supuesto, la razón por la que muchas veces no quiere salir es por otras razones de corrupción, ¿verdad? Pero entonces, cuando queremos ver calidad, es, por ejemplo, si hemos tenido avances, el apoyo que INL pueda dar a la policía, por ejemplo. Antes hablábamos de las comisarías modelos, hoy estamos hablando de un MOPSIC, que es el modelo de prevención en las comunidades, que eso también ha contribuido a disminuir la violencia, pero es importante ir estratégicamente, por ejemplo, a la formación policial. Yo sé que el modelo de Estados Unidos es diferente al de Guatemala y Centroamérica, en donde la academia y la escuela de oficiales juegan un papel importante, pero que es complementario para que toda la policía en sí, por un lado, a través del campo, los modelos MOPSIC, por ejemplo, empiecen a cambiar su paradigma de prevención, y aparte el tema desde la formación. Otro tema que queremos nosotros, por ejemplo, en el caso de Guatemala, querer hacer lo que tienen sus consecuencias, el tema de los préstamos multilaterales. Últimamente Guatemala ha estado haciendo préstamos multilaterales al BID y al Banco Mundial, por ejemplo, para funcionamiento, pero no para inversión pública. Y de ahí entendemos también nosotros por qué esa inversión pública, o el rezago de no tener inversión pública en Guatemala, se lleva hasta 50 y 60 años. De esa cuenta, en lugar de cerrar muchas veces la brecha de la inequidad y de la pobreza, se ha agrandado. Y eso incluye y tiene que ver, por ejemplo, con cobertura de justicia, que son todo el tema de juzgados, ministerios públicos, etcétera, comisarías, ¿verdad? Porque una vez los sujetos judiciales no estén presentes, no se puede llevar a cabo una audiencia, y por lo tanto también tiene un costo en la policía. Pero también tiene que ver, que no lo vamos a monitorear, pero es parte de la Alianza para la Prosperidad, el tema de salud y educación, ¿verdad? Entonces, todo esto tiene que ver también con préstamos multilaterales, y que también hay un rol que creemos que esto puede hacerse, y que el tema es cómo monitorear que ese presupuesto también contemple inversión pública, no solamente gasto. Y de ahí viene ya el tema de todo lo que es recolección de impuestos, ¿verdad?, de los guatemaltecos. El otro, para medir el tema del discurso de odio, porque precisamente lo que ha utilizado estos grupos yo diría que no quieren perder sus privilegios, el dark side decimos nosotros. Perdón que me esté riendo, pero una vez estaba el Luis Galvez y tenía su corbata, y era de Star Wars, precisamente, el de la luz contra el lado oscuro. Entonces, por eso la broma del lado oscuro, que no quieren perder esos privilegios, han iniciado toda una campaña de desprestigio y difamación en contra de los jueces honestos, de los diputados, incluso porque hay diputados que también son buenos. O sea, en todas las instituciones encontramos incluso ministros, ¿verdad? Tenemos ministros, tenemos secretarios, tenemos gente honesta que ha sido atacada con este discurso del odio, metiendo el miedo por razones ideológicas, que solamente es un tema de una cortina de humo. Por ejemplo, decir que las reformas constitucionales nos estamos llevando a Venezuela, entonces ponen al embajador Robinson como que es comunista, ¿verdad? Por ejemplo, por querer hacer estos cambios constitucionales. Entonces, yo solamente quiero decir cómo es importante el apoyo que puedan darnos desde el Congreso para todos estos cambios, que realmente sea un acompañamiento de calidad. Nosotros sabemos que somos los guatemaltecos, que también tenemos que tener nuestra agenda, que coincide en este momento con una agenda propia de Estados Unidos y con una agenda propia que tenemos que tener los guatemaltecos para realmente poder salir adelante. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. I don't know if Congresswoman Torres has a question, or if you'd like. Okay.
I wanted to stay through that.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a little bit extra time, actually. We have the room a little bit after, so if you guys bear with me, I'm going to ask a question or two, and then I'll open it up to the floor. So if you can just, if you have a particular person that you'd like to ask and you want to direct it to that person, that would be great. My question relates to, two things. One, in your monitor, I understand that you're focusing mostly on the criminal justice system, and I wonder if you're taking any note of whether or not you feel that development and economic assistance is also important, and how that will factor into your monitor, because there could be a change where there's less emphasis on that, and I wonder if the country still need that or not. And the other is, when I was in Honduras and El Salvador a couple of weeks ago, the narrative of the U.S. Embassy and the measurement of success was more migration control and homeland security maybe than it had been in the past. So is this monitor's, these things are still kind of the end goal, right? That you want people to have a society that they can live in safely and be protected by their governments. But how do you see the lens of U.S. policy, maybe a shift in that, affecting the programs that Congress has provided funding for? For anyone.
You want to take us?
Maybe you guys, and then I'll open it up.
So as I mentioned, for us, development and addressing the issues of lack of opportunities and poverty are vital. WOLA and others, we've supported, the expansion of looking at U.S. assistance to also address issues of development, and we think they're key, and these are all issues that are related. As I mentioned, the areas that we chose them also in thinking about the expertise that we, as the organizations that are part of this project, bring to the table. WOLA has a long history of work looking at issues of police reform, rule of law, justice reform, and so do our other partners, and that's why, the greater emphasis on those areas, not to send a message that the others are not important, and hopefully somebody welcome others to take on looking at those very important issues as well that are interlinked and very key to this process, and to actually moving forward with or bringing about change in the region. Our hope is to, with your second question, to also be able to assess through the monitor, and particularly as we track U.S. assistance, if there are any shifts in U.S. policy. And to be able to have information on that, and how there might be a shift to looking at issues that move away from the need to address issues of corruption, address issues of institutional strengthening. I think for us, a vital piece to addressing conditions on the ground is strengthening the institutions. How can we improve people's access to justice, have institutions that address the needs of Honduras, of Guatemalans, El Salvadorans. So hopefully, as we monitor progress on the ground, is also to be able to send a very clear message of things that need, or areas that need to be addressed, or where there has been progress.
Yo solo quería responderte que también es a través de como implementation para combatir la corrupción, que esto lleva con los casos, porque es justo en los contratos que tienen que ir para el desarrollo, o cuando tú no tenías, por ejemplo, cuando haces presupuesto y pones gastos de inversión, y si ahí hay contratos de corrupción, entonces ahí es donde impide el desarrollo.
Yo creo que es importante que esta ayuda llegue, en primer lugar. Y en segundo lugar, que tenga el impacto que se espera. Y eso es lo que ayudará al monitor a dar seguimiento a todos estos indicadores que vamos a seguir precisamente para que la gente pueda vivir bien, para que la gente pueda quedarse en sus casas, en sus barrios, en sus comunidades, pero con una convivencia pacífica.
Yeah, just very quickly along the same line and kind of in response to Claire's point. Clearly, in the political discourse in the United States, the topics of migration and border security are much higher visibility than they've been, with the exception of the immediate aftermath of the unaccompanied minors kind of surge. They're much higher visibility now than they've been in some time, and that is clearly having an impact on the debate. Nonetheless, I think the fundamental premise of U.S. assistance was, and I think continues to be, that strengthening institutions and increasing safety and stability is in the long run what will reduce the incentives for people to leave the country because of violence or desperation. And so, while building institutions doesn't solve the problem overnight, a serious and ongoing investment in strengthening institutions will make an important long-term difference. And I think that needs to continue to be the focus of the policy.
Caterina Valero with DI. Thank you for the great panel. I just wanted to ask how are you going to collect the information? You have several organizations here that are implementing UX assistance programs in the region. And the second one is for Victoria. Quería saber si tienen indicadores de violencia escolar entre los 22 indicadores que están recogiendo. If you have school-based violence indicators in your company.
Should we take that?
Two more questions, maybe?
Hi, Casey McKay with McClarty Associates. Thank you as well for a great panel. We work with a number of companies, U.S. companies primarily invested in Central America, and they are, of course, very supportive of the anti-corruption efforts as well as of the critical bilateral, multilateral assistance that supports those efforts. But they have at times also found that there can be implementation challenges, that well-meaning but perhaps overzealous officials who inadvertently create consequences that actually serve as a disincentive for investment. How do you, I guess it's a question for anybody, but how do you try to strike that balance and get the details right?
And one more, right here.
Hi, thank you, and thank you all for an excellent panel. I'm Vicky Gass from Oxfam, and I have three very, very brief questions. The first is the violence issue to look at gender-based violence and homicides? Secondly, are my colleagues from Central America aware of the IDB's infrastructure funds? And are you aware of that? And the third is, I thought I heard that the baseline report will be coming out in the next few weeks. Is that right? I just was curious. Yeah.
So, just answering in different orders. In terms of the collection of data, so as I mentioned, in the case of the indicators, we're using different sources. Some of the sources are primary data, so government information and statistics. Most of those we're trying to collect using the Freedom of Information laws of the 3 countries. One is just a way of also testing the quality and the scope of those laws and how much access citizens actually have and the quality of the information. We're also using surveys. We're not carrying out the surveys ourselves, but 2 of our organizations actually do public surveys, so we'll be using those and others. We're doing interviews, both to a variety of sectors depending on the different indicators, looking at reviewing existing legislation and comparing it to international standards. And then doing more of a qualitative analysis of emblematic cases that we have already selected to kind of see how those cases move through the system. With regards to U.S. assistance, many of you that follow U.S. assistance know how difficult it is to get access to information. Some of that, we're doing through interviews. There are going to be some holes, but we're trying to piece as many pieces of the puzzle together to be able to provide data on, how much is being invested, where we're spending the money, in a way that is very clear to people outside of the Beltway. If there are agencies that receive funding and would want to share their information, I welcome that in order to be able to piece as clear of a picture as possible. The indicators do include gender violence. We went through a whole exercises of including a gender's perspective to the extent that we could to many of the indicators, trying to also see what kind of information exists. So we did include issues of femicide, trafficking of women, and other issues that pertain to gender. And the initial findings of baseline documents we hope to be able to publish, I would say probably within the next month or so. As in, we get all the information and be able to analyze all the data.
Como Observatorio de la Violencia, estamos estableciendo una relación estratégica en este momento con la nueva Secretaría de Educación, precisamente porque es una vicerrectora académica de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Honduras y ella también está muy interesada. Siempre en los temas de violencia escolar han sido esfuerzos pilotos específicos en el municipio, barrio, pero toda la estrategia de prevención también está tocando la prevención de violencia escolar. Y ahí porque hay muchos problemas en ese tema, y yo he trabajado 5 años en colegios y escuelas tratando de que los jóvenes no se liguen o se unan a las maras y las pandillas, que no usen armas y demás, y porque esa es una de las problemáticas que hay en el país. Ya tenemos la base de datos de unas preguntas que la Secretaría de Educación hizo a los directores de los centros educativos. Estamos en ese procesamiento para ver qué nos sale y evidenciar a través de un informe que la Secretaría de Educación va a presentar. En el tema de violencia de género, como observatorio también tenemos una unidad de muerte violenta de mujeres y femicidios, y ahí nos unimos con la sociedad civil, con los movimientos de mujeres, precisamente para dar seguimiento cuántas muertes violentas de mujeres ocurren, qué tipos de muertes o de lesiones en los que no llegan a la muerte está ocurriendo en el país, y poder establecer si son o no son femicidios, pues precisamente porque en el 2013 el Congreso Nacional estableció una figura de femicidio como adición al Código Penal de Honduras, y desde el año 2008 el Observatorio de la Violencia ha establecido ese análisis comparativo de esa figura precisamente como un análisis académico y ahora como un análisis legal. También dos cosas importantes: este año con NDI vamos a desarrollar la encuesta de percepción y victimización en Honduras. En el mes de junio estamos iniciando, pero dentro de 2 meses hemos desarrollado ya una encuesta de confianza en las instituciones, una encuesta nacional basada en los 18 departamentos de Honduras, que nos va a dar cuenta de cuánto confía o no la población en las instituciones que tenemos. Esa dentro de 2 meses estaremos presentando, precisamente porque ya se hizo el levantamiento de campo y ya vamos a ver las opiniones de la ciudadanía.
Quiero responder a la pregunta sobre el sector privado. Yo creo que el tema no es que estemos en contra o que queramos subir tanto los estándares de anticorrupción. Yo creo que lo que se le exige a las empresas o lo que se les ha estado exigiendo es que cumplan con los estándares internacionales para que puedan demostrar también su efectividad. Lo que pasa es que tú no puedes ser efectivo, por ejemplo, empresas que pagan en Guatemala que puedan ser efectivas si tienen subsidios, no pagan impuestos, contratos con el Estado, y esa es su forma de ser competitivos. Yo creo que precisamente parte de la certeza jurídica es que las reglas sean iguales para todos y que todo se aplique. De ahí, porque es importante no solamente en el tema penal, sino que también en lo civil, ¿verdad? Haya un organismo judicial que sea independiente. La mejor garantía que tenemos los ciudadanos es precisamente la independencia judicial, y que no sea por nombramiento. Bueno, aquí está una magistrada Escobar, que ella es jueza civil y te puede contar las amenazas. Tuvo que salir del país por un tema civil, por ejemplo, no necesariamente penal, por los intereses que se juegan, no estás jugando un poco de dinero. Entonces, esa es la idea, ¿verdad? De que los jueces honestos realmente sean los que prevalezcan, no los corruptos que están sujetos a la presión de una de las partes que se están jugando de un contrato civil, que son contratos millonarios. Entonces, esa es la idea, ¿verdad? De cómo ir dando certeza jurídica, pero que también reúnan los estándares internacionales. Y yo te lo puedo decir, bueno, aquí está la embajadora y me va a contradecir, pero por ejemplo, en Guatemala no tenemos bancos internacionales. Por decir algo, antes teníamos el Lloyds Bank, teníamos Deutsche Bank, teníamos todos los bancos internacionales, se fueron. Ahorita solo hay bancos locales. Y cuando tú les preguntas a los banqueros internacionales, es que las regulaciones son muy riesgosas, que no les garantiza una seguridad para la inversión. Entonces quiere decir que no hay competencia.
I'll take one more round of questions. I just had two quick things. If you guys are staffers and or you know staffers, one good source of information about where is the money, what is the money doing, what is the strategy, because a lot of NGOs don't know, is my colleague Peter Meyer just wrote a 2-pager for staffers on the U.S. strategy for engagement in Central America. And most people don't know that some of the money hasn't even gotten to the embassies yet. The INL, the Narcotics Affairs section in Honduras, is still waiting to get the 2016 money. So when you're asking where are the results, where's the success, sometimes it's because it's not there yet. And just to have, this is a more thorough look at it. Peter just did this in April, U.S. Strategy for Engagement in Central America Policy Issues for Congress. So that might be something too, to provide information, links to things that people have done. Sometimes we come across things that don't get a lot of play, and maybe you would be able to advertise that stuff. Does anyone have a question yourself?
Paul Miller, Lutheran World Relief. Thanks, Representative Torres, for hosting and for this great initiative from WOLA. There you asked my question about development and the links between development and impunity and corruption were talked about. My question is, the monitors for audiences here, it seems, is there a plan for disseminating in Central America? It might be useful there. I'm just wondering whether that is in the works.
Hi, Christina Arabia from Security Assistance Monitor. My question is for Ola mainly. I'm curious to what extent you're able to track or monitor kind of training and assistance from Colombia to Central America through the U.S.-Colombia Security Cooperation Plan.
One more maybe? Does anyone? I don't think they have a microphone.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Claudia Escobar, he sido juez en Guatemala hace 10 años, soy funcionaria en el National Endowment for Democracy y quisiera saber si el proyecto va a hacer un análisis de las reformas pendientes que hay de las instituciones, especialmente las instituciones del sector justicia.
So with regards to dissemination, yes, we will be presenting the monitor in each of the 3 countries over the course of the summer. We hope to share the tool so civil society and others can use it. The monitor will be in both Spanish and English, so we also welcome information from colleagues in the region, and that will happen again over the course of the summer. With regards to your question about trainers, my colleague actually, Sarah Knosian, who works with the Citizen Security Program and our defense oversight, has been looking into that issue. So she, has been able, I think, to access some of that information and can answer that question in more detail than I can. But yes, we are looking at that issue as well as WOLA. And to Claudia's question, part of it, yes, is looking at, as we look at the issues of institutional strengthening of the justice sector, is also to be able to see what has happened right now and try to identify the direction of where reforms should be moving.
Okay, right, thank you so much for coming today. Does anyone have a final comment? Or I just wanted to thank the audience for being so attentive and for all the great information that we provide. We're excited to kind of follow your monitor and how things are released. Thank you.